So let's talk through the big miniature release wave this week, with cheap Guardsman alternatives and plastic Malcadors, a new combat patrol spotted in White Dwarf, the unusual case of the Kroot not selling out instantly, and a few other 40k reveals and teasers. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd talk through a whole bunch of minor news things for Warhammer 40k releases over the past couple of weeks that I maybe didn't think needed an entire video all to themselves, but I still thought were interesting enough to feature on the channel quickly. In this one I thought I'd cover the rather large solo Auxilia launch. Now we're getting those kits individually. I think there are a couple of kits in particular that might have some interest for 40k players. Take a look at how that Kroot release has worked out for Games Workshop. It seems they've sold out in some places, but not everywhere. Take a look at the new Imperial Agents, Voidsmen and Breachers Combat Patrol. One more teaser for Adepticon that came out today, and some little Shadowswords and Stormblades. Starting out with the solo Auxilia, it seems like the major release for the Grim Darkness of the Far Future is for them this week. I feel like compared with at least a fair few releases for Heresy, I've seen a lot of people really quite hyped for these as stand-ins and interesting models for Warhammer 40k. And perhaps chief amongst those are the plastic Malcador and the infantry squads, both of which potentially could be interesting enough money saving compared with some of the other things that Games Workshop offer. The Malcador has long been one of the bigger and fancier tanks that the Astra Militarum can field via their Forge World range. They still have rules for it in Imperial armour, and unlike the Space Marines who have had all of their shiny Forge World stuff sent to Legends, this one is still a playable in-game datasheet for Warhammer 40k, so it might be of interest to at least some collectors now that you can get it as a plastic kit for a slightly more same price than the Forge World one was. It turns out that the plastic Malcador is £55, $90 or €70, so that comes in at the same price as a standard repulsor or a gladiator tank, just a little bit cheaper than the Rogal Dawn. I feel like that's fairly standard issue pricing for Games Workshop. If anything, it's maybe a tiny bit less than I might have expected, given that it is really quite a big chunky tank, quite a lot longer than the standard Lehman Russ, and has a pretty enormous main gun. Compared with the Forge World kits that some people might have picked up over the years, it's around about half the price of the Forge World Malcador variants, many of which are no longer continued given that they've been replaced by this. I still notice that there's the Malcador Infernus and Malcador Defender, which I don't believe that you'd be able to quite as neatly proxy with this one, not without a bit of conversion work. In any case, I do think it's pretty cool to be able to get a Malcador chassis in plastic. Currently the data sheets for Warhammer 40k really aren't that strong, I'm afraid. They basically have a similar sort of style stat line to the Rogal Dawn: toughness 11, 18 wounds and a 2+ save. A little bit less toughness than the Mighty Dawn, and on the whole I'd probably rate the overall offering by the Rogal Dawn's guns as just that bit better. I feel like the standard Malcador could probably have afforded to have a slightly more powerful main gun, as its battle cannon is just the same as a standard Russ one, despite it being a much bigger and heavier tank. Out of any of the datasheets, it might well be the Malcador Annihilator that could be the most interesting. That one at least gets a threatening Demolisher cannon, plus a twin-link las cannon, and takes some las cannon sponsons. In general, I wouldn't consider them particularly competitive due to competition with the Dawns and Russes, but not really too unusable casually, being really big tough tanks that can sit at the back and take a beating. I'm sure some people might be overall tempted by the look and feel of them. I'd say perhaps the biggest thing that would stop me picking up one for my Imperial Guard is the sketchy rule support that Imperial armor seems to get for Warhammer 40k. Space Marines did have all of their fancy Forge World armor kind of brutally sent to Legends, and I feel like given that this one's getting a similar sort of Heresy era plastic release, there's definitely a non-zero chance of the 40k datasheet getting mothballed. Sticking with the solo Auxilia, I feel like this kit could also be an interesting one for 40k collectors. Heresy tends to do things at scale, and as a result the solo Auxilia las rifle section contains 20 models. This one's £45, $75 or €60, and it basically gets you 20 guys with standard las guns, las rifles in Heresy, and they're equipped in their chunky iconic void suits, which I must admit I really do quite like the look and aesthetic of. They look very industrial, and I feel like they might be the sort of things that you might see things like generic Chaos Cultists represented in the lore. With Imperial Guard regiments having so many different forms across different worlds as well, I feel like you could create a really cool one based around this model kit. Perhaps one of the most interesting things though is that if you just want Guardsman equivalent models from Games Workshop, these do look like one of the cheapest. For these ones you get them at $3.75 per model. Whereas if you compare that to Cadian Guardsmen, Deathcore Krieg Guardsmen, Chaos Cultists or Neophyte Hybrids, it's a fair bit ahead of any of those. Could just make them a little bit more tempting if they would do for your purposes, for your theme of your army. Could be one to consider as an alternative. I guess for downsides, they might just not fit in very well with the rest of the army's range if they're placed side by side, I suppose, depending on which faction you're playing and how many infantry you have, and depending on your exact purposes for them, whether they're proxying in for some guardsmen or some cultists, you might just need to get your hands on some special weapons from them. I believe that these ones just come with their basic las rifles, so if you wanted things like grenade launchers or plasma guns or melter guns or anything like that, you would have to raise the bits box or combine them with certain other kits. Overall does feel like a pretty credible option for some alternative guardsman sculpts though, direct from Games Workshop, being offered a little bit cheaper per model and in bulk if you do like their alternative aesthetic. Otherwise for the launch, they've got the command section and the Velataris storm section. The command section could work pretty well just as an alternative command squad for the guard, I guess. The storm section maybe as some sort of stormtroopers or Kazakin in a pinch. There's also some more vehicles as well. There's the alternative sculpts for the Lehman Russ, which I feel like a few people were interested in. Might be of interest to some people out there who maybe want to pick one up with a different sort of design. Maybe if they're going for a retro STC pattern or something like that to represent a Vanquisher or similar. They've got the cool sort of trench crossing roll bar sort of things on the back, plus quite a cool looking dozer blade on the front, I think. I would bear in mind that these ones don't come with sponsons though, so are a bit suboptimal in 40k unless you have a spare set of them lying around or something. Maybe limits their role as direct proxies. In any case, those are the same price as the regular Lehman Russ. You get either the assault tank or the strike tank, depending on which guns you want in the kit. Otherwise, there's that lumbering Ethon Heavy Sentinel, maybe a little bit more pricey than I was expecting there, £37 or $60 US. And as mentioned, we've got the Malcador at £55, $90 or €70. Looks like that's the same price as their Dracosan transport, the big and very heavily armed and armoured troop carrier of the Auxilia, sporting a massive demolisher cannon. As per normal, all these guys should be going up for pre-order on Saturday. I'd imagine that independent retailers are going to have at least fairly decent stock of them. Feel free to check out the ones in the video description for discounts and helping support the channel. There's plenty of other good alternative ones out there as well, of course. Talking of miniature releases, I was kind of interested to check back on the Kroot Mercenary box set that we got for the Tower Empire launch and how well that sold for Games Workshop. It does seem that at least at first glance there was a much bigger supply than typical for Games Workshop launch boxes. Unlike several similar box sets in the past, it looks like the third-party discount retailers could get plenty of these, implying that Games Workshop had actually manufactured a good amount. Certainly a far cry from the slightly pitiful allocations they've got from several boxes previously. It does look like there was far more of these to go around compared with the Deathwing launch, which really did sell out far too quickly. Taking a look at Games Workshop's web store around the world, it looks like the box set sold out in the USA and Canada, though it didn't go absolutely instantly there, and it still remains available in the UK, EU, and Australia. Taking a look at discount retailers around the world, it looks like they generally still have at least some. Several have them in the UK, including Element Games, linked in the video description below. They're doing them at 20% off at £108, a bit more than they often discount box sets when they get very limited. Looking at my other channel affiliates, looks like Fenris Workshop still have them in Canada for $239 Canadian dollars. Seems that Gap Games and Wargame Portal sold out at time of recording. Though looking at other stores in Australia and the US, it does look like plenty still have them still going at discounts. I think it's generally a much better experience for hobbyists to be hyped up with a box set and then actually have the chance to buy it if they want to. It'd be nice if this became a bit more the norm compared with the previous releases Games Workshop have often done. I think my instinct for this one is that GW chose to produce quite a lot more than this compared with the demand not really being there. Plenty of places have sold out, including their web store in the USA. It does show that lots of people wanted to pick up the kit. It just feels that there were probably a lot more of these produced initially compared with, say, the Deathwing box. It does maybe strike me, though, that it might be a bit more niche appeal compared with a Tower box set that, say, came with a whole bunch of new Tower miniatures, given that a lot of people think that the crews are cool. They still really are quite a niche faction within 40k generally, and due to their slightly hoardy and low-tech nature, the box set doesn't exactly come with a lot of points of miniatures either. If you did want to create a full, say, 2000 point Kroot meme army, you'd have to get either a lot of copies of this or plenty of their other kits once they go on full release. Next up, I was interested to see the Combat Patrol news from White Dwarf. It looks like they've done another slight twist on their format with a Voidsmen at Arms Combat Patrol. It seems that White Dwarf 498 comes with a rule set for a formation known as Vantarian's Voidsmen. Another one of these White Dwarf Combat Patrol offerings that isn't actually associated with any discount box. They have been putting out some slightly more creative rule sets for different ways that you can play Combat Patrol with different armies. We've had ones for the Space Marines Vanguard and the Tyranids Von Ryan's Leapers before. I was kind of curious to see what they did with these guys. It looks like in the Force you take a Rogue Trader entourage, so that's the 4 models with the Rogue Trader leading them. A squad of 10 Voidsmen at Arms from the Elucidian Starstriders set, and then 2 sets of Imperial Navy Breachers, which are allowed 2 patrol squad, so split in half. I think in theory that would mean that if you did want to run these guys, you need 4 kits, so 2 sets of Breachers and I think 2 sets of the Rogue Traders, given that you only get, I think, 5 Voidsmen in the Elucidian Starstriders kit. You could probably proxy with other human infantry models though. Putting that all together and it would be a fairly hardy little combat patrol. 30 bodies led by a 4 model command squad. In general, their firepower is going to be fairly effective against any sort of lighter hordes. Those are going to struggle to do anything against things that have got good saves or high armor. For their stratagems, there's a 1 command point 1 for some much better firepower, +1 attack and +1 ballistic skill to their ranged weapons for 1 unit is kind of nice. There's a 1 command point reactive move of d6 inches for 1, and a 1 command point shoots on death rule on a 4+. Will definitely help their damage output, but maybe not specifically against tough stuff or vehicles, which is maybe what they needed to focus on a bit more perhaps. For the enhancements, there's one for free Overwatch on a 5+ and critical hits on a 5+ for their lead unit, or command phase bombardment style rule where you get to nominate 1 enemy unit on the board and they halve their move and their -1 to advance and charge. Could be kind of critical for stopping a unit getting to an objective or into melee, I guess. And finally, for their selected secondary objectives, there's one way you can try and stand a warlord on an objective each turn. Then you roll the dice for a random amount of victory points, going up to a 4 on a 5+. And the other option is one where you have to have a unit within no man's land, and if you can also get 1 unit within your deployment zone, then that's 2 victory points, so I guess that's quite easy to do. And then for the boosted version, if you get 1 unit in no man's land and 1 unit in the enemy deployment zone, it goes up to 5 victory points. Seems like White Dwarf are being quite consistent with these Combat Patrol releases. I wonder if we'll wind up getting much of these throughout a lot of the rest of the edition. I guess this one might not be the worst for people who bought the Boarding Patrol set for Agents of the Imperium when that was out in 9th. Next up, we got another small Adepticon teaser earlier today. 2 days to go till Games Workshop's next big reveal session at Adepticon, which sounds like it's going to have a Chaos Space Marine focus. We had the teaser image of the Chaos Lord yesterday, which looked like it was a reimagination of one of their classic metal sculpts there. The teaser image for this one looks like it's a dwarf of some sort. I did initially wonder whether it might be a Leagues of Votan model, but it doesn't look like it, to be honest. I think that it's going to be a fantasy miniature. A few people's speculation that I saw thought that it might be a Dwarf King or Dwarf Lord on shield bearers for the old world. Again, a very classic retro 40k miniature style feel there, like the model pictured as a squad insert into a unit. Given its stocky nature, I did see a few people make some jokes about the new Custodian Shield Captain looking good. In any case, it'll be fun to cover those. I'll certainly talk through them here on the channel when the reveals come out. Finally, I did think that the new little Shadowswords and Stormblades were kind of cool that they teased for Legions Imperialis. Looks like they're going to be keeping reveals and things drip-fed for those on Thursdays. The Heresy Thursday offerings tend to vary between character miniatures, upgrade sprues, and things for Legions Imperialis. These ones being offerings for miniature versions of Titan-slaying tanks. I'd guess that these would probably cost the same amount as the Baneblades for that game system, which were £30, €40, or $50 per 2. It is kind of interesting with the small scale for these things. I believe they're usually about a quarter of the size of the 40k model equivalents, but given that the Baneblade is quite a big kit, having them shrunk down to this size still means that you've got at least fairly chunky models here, and you do get 2 of them in a box. In any case though, let me know your thoughts on the Solar Auxilia release, the new Voidsmen models, and the Kroot release. Look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly try and keep up with Games Workshop's news and rumours as they come out. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.